So feel free to let me know in the chat if you are here for Spanish, if it's here for French. I know some of you I work with, I tutor your children, but others, there's lots of new faces as well. So it's really interesting for me to find out whether your child is studying Spanish, French, or even if they're dual linguists. Um, it's an interactive webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to either pop them in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask the questions as well. Just as a start, I'll introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. You can learn a little bit about me. I am a qualified teacher, MFL teacher, specialising in Spanish and French. I used to teach Spanish up to A level. I'm a current examiner for a main UK exam board, and I now am a full-time tutor. I started my business, SJ Languages, and the main aim of my tutoring is to support GCSE students and really building up confidence in the language, but also building up exam skills early on. As I know, even from my own teaching experience, that with such a broad curriculum to cover, often the exam skills get left behind or are taught last minute, and actually embedding them really early, I found has really helped with students' progress. It was really exciting as I only went full time really in January. And this year I've been nominated and was a finalist for Online Tutor of the Year, which is, yeah, really proud of that. Um, in terms of my qualifications, I have a BA in French and Spanish. I've got a first class honours and a distinction in spoken French and Spanish. So I really use that knowledge and all of the skills that I used in preparation for my own exams when I'm helping students with their speaking exam prep. I'm UK born and bred, but I actually moved to Tenerife when I was 10 and got thrown into a Spanish school and actually sat some international GCSEs. I learnt Spanish through immersion initially, and then I started studying French at school before I decided to take it on and study Spanish and French at degree. So I've lived in France as part of my degree. I taught in some French schools, and I've done lots of traveling around Spanish and French speaking countries. So I can use all of my cultural knowledge in my tutoring sessions as well. Part of the GCSE curriculum is about customs and festivals and traditions. So I'm able to give like my firsthand experience of some of the ones that I've experienced along the way as well. And just as a bit of a fun fact, those of you that follow me on social media know that I'm a Labrador mum. My Labrador Dora had puppies over the summer. I've had a very busy summer, having a litter of labs, and I now currently have 2 puppies at home with me. So a nice busy household, and I love water sports as well. So you might see some of that in on my socials. I'd love to know, what is the number one challenge your child faces with their Spanish or French studies? Now, I've asked this question a number of times to parents in different webinars that I've run, and I ran one last week for the year 11 students. And often there's a common theme. So feel free to share what you think your child needs the most support with in terms, or what they find the most difficult with their studies. And again, feel free to share in the chat. Yes, speaking comes up. Speaking and listening is often the main two, and they work in tandem. And also vocab and grammar is often what comes up. And I'm going to be sharing some tips and tricks with you about how we can support them in terms of building up their confidence, how to revise, how to practice their Spanish, and also for you to understand the exam. And I find that we know that they're going to have a speaking exam, but what does that speaking exam look like? How are they, for 12 minutes, what are they speaking Spanish or French about, and how is it laid out? So this is a kind of real broken down of each of the exams, so you can see exactly what your child needs to know. This is also useful for them, and feel free to share the recording back with them. If they've got a mock coming up and they want to know what's going to happen in each of the exams, then this will be really useful for them as well. And the exciting thing is there's a whole new GCSE started this year. So I'm going to share with you the knowledge that I've got of it so far. I've been doing lots of research and some training myself over the summer. Teachers are in the same boat. At the moment, teachers in school will be teaching the current year 11s one GCSE and then all of the years underneath it. So whether they do a GCSE from year 10 or some schools even start GCSEs in year 9, those year 9s and year 10s are going to be starting the new GCSE. So at the moment, we've got 2 different GCSEs running at the same time. So that's something to be mindful of when you're buying resources for revision or using online resources or past papers, making sure that you've got the right exam for the right year. And I'll share with you about that in this talk. But essentially, today, you're going to find out about how the exam structure works, how you can try and seek some effective revision strategies, and obviously you want your child to excel in their GCSE exams. So we're going to look at some of the key insights. I'm going to share with you some of the topics that your child needs to master, and then I'll talk to you about some further support as well. So in terms of the exam structure, the exams are separated into 4 exams. You've got listening and understanding, you've got speaking, you've got reading and understanding, and you've got writing. Now, each of these are worth 25% of your overall grade, and your child will be entered into the same tier, whether it's foundation or higher, for all of the papers. So if they're sitting a foundation paper, then the target grade is a 5. That's the maximum you can get on a foundation paper. So students working towards that target of a 4 or a 5 for their pass at GCSE languages will be entered into that foundation paper. For students that are aiming to get grade 6 to 9, they will sit the higher paper. And typically with the higher paper, it goes from grades 4 to 9. There's no grade 1, 2, or 3. So if they didn't hit a 4, they could end up with a U. So that's what you've just got to be mindful of the different papers. Now you can see on screen that this year, with the new GCSE, the exam boards have made some changes, whereas in the previous GCSE, AQA and Edexcel were pretty much similar in terms of content. Vocab was very similar as well. And although the exam style questions were different, the papers were in the same order. But if you're looking at past papers online, for example, and you look at paper 1 now, for AQA, a paper 1 is your listening, but paper 1 in Edexcel is now speaking. So you just need to be mindful of these differences. So just checking in, do you know which exam board your child is studying or is going to study if you're looking ahead for future GCSEs? But essentially, you've got the listening and understanding, reading and understanding, speaking and writing. Now, typically, speaking is the first exam that they will sit. And normally, the way it works is just after the Easter holidays in year 11. That's when the speaking and exam window opens, and students will have their speaking exam much earlier than all the other exams and all their other GCSEs. So I think that's why Edexcel has decided just to renumber the papers, because speaking is the first one that they do. So it makes sense to call it paper 1 rather than paper 2. But they're equally graded. So you will find that naturally students might be confident and excel in one skill over another. So they might do really well with writing because they can prepare for it in advance, but maybe they don't do so well with speaking because it's in real time. They've got to think of their answer off the cuff. And maybe they might have anxiety, and that can impact their performance as well. So again, it averages out, but often once you've done a set of mocks, you'll be able to find out which paper and which skill maybe your child needs a bit more support or needs to focus on with their revision. But it's important to understand that the 4 exams make up the whole GCSE. So in terms of assessment now, they've changed the assessment objectives. So there's 3 assessment objectives. The first one is that they get marked on their understanding and responding to spoken language in speaking and writing. They also get marked on understanding and responding to written language in speaking and writing, and then demonstrating application of grammar and vocab. We don't need to worry too much about this at the moment, but you can See, this one here is for AQA, and the one with the turquoise top is from the Edexcel website. But you can see here that for each of the papers, paper one, 25% of the grade is there. 25% speaking, 25% reading, and 25% writing. So they're always going to make up 25%. You can see with Edexcel, they've just done it differently on their tables, but essentially the speaking, listening, reading, and writing is all 25%. If you're wondering, for example, AO2, understanding and responding written language, if we're responding to written language, it has to be a writing page, it has to be a text, doesn't it? And then we're responding to it. So, for example, reading is only that AO2 because we're just reading the text and responding to it. But that's how it's broken down. The good thing about the new GCSE, there's pros and cons to it, is it's very prescriptive in terms of vocabulary. So each exam board has released a vocab list of 1,200 words for foundation, and for higher, there's an extra 500 words. Essentially, in reading exams and listening exams, all of the vocab has to come from the vocab list. Whereas before, like with the current GCSE for year 11s, there's lots of vocabulary that appears in the reading and listening that isn't on their vocab lists, it isn't on their curriculum, they have to work it out from context. It's much trickier. Whereas with this one, if your child knows all of the vocab on the vocab list, then they should be able to answer all of the reading and listening questions because they know what the vocab means. So it's really good in this way that we have the lists from the exam boards. There, I can send you the links for where you can access the vocab lists off the websites. They aren't very student friendly. So behind the scenes at the moment, what I'm working on is building up some vocab lists that are student friendly that they can use to revise, and they can tick them off as they've learned them. And I can share those with you once I've worked through and made those. As well as the vocab list, they have some short phrases and some geographical or cultural words that they've also included. But essentially, they've looked at what is the top 2,000 most frequent words used in that language, and most of the vocabulary has come from that. So this year with the new GCSEs, the vocab list is slightly different between the two exam boards. That's why with my tuition groups, I've now separated them into exam board specific because they do vary slightly. But the great thing is, there's an emphasis on making sure your child knows that topic vocab. So depending on whether your child is studying AQA or Edexcel, they've separated the vocab into different topics or themes. Now, they often overlap, but you can see, for example, AQA has split it into 3 themes. So people and lifestyle. So in this one, this is going to be identity and relationship with others. So this also, if we look at Edexcel, comes into like my personal world, lifestyle and well-being. And within these topics, like within identity, you're going to talk about family, you're going to talk about friends, you're going to talk about your relationships with your family members and friends. So that you're looking at pretty much the same themes, they're just laid out and organized differently depending on the exam board. The same as like healthy living and lifestyle, which is under people and lifestyles of AQA. Within Edexcel, that's going to be under their lifestyle and well-being topic. They've actually got a theme specific for it. And education and work, whereas Edexcel, it would be studying in my future. So you can see that it's the same vocab. They've just used it across different topics. And again, if you think it's useful, I'm planning to do some folder covers with each of the themes with some checklists for your student so they can tick them off. Oh, sorry. I've had a hay fever flare up. So, it's at the back of my throat at the minute. But yeah, so this is how it's going to work with the themes. You've got popular culture, communications and the world around us. And you'll notice that like communications and the world around us, that links into Edexcel's theme of travel and tourism and media and technology. So a lot of these do overlap. Essentially, they're going to be talking about things like what they get up to with their friends and family, free time activities, what they like to do in their free time, their hobbies. They're going to be looking at healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, what type of activities they do to have that good lifestyle. They're going to look at food and drink, ordering in restaurants, going to a restaurant. It could be buying food as well, shopping, clothes shopping, terms of holiday, booking accommodation, talking about how they got there, talking about travel. They go on to talk about like their natural world and things like environmental issues. Do they recycle? They talk about their current studies, their school life, and then they even talk about future aspirations and learn how to talk about different jobs and things like that. So it is a really comprehensive GCSE. Some of the new topics include things like celebrity culture, looking at role models and the influence of celebrities as well. And that's a new topic for this GCSE to make it more current and up to date. You can see there's a lot of content, and this is split across year 10 and year 11. Typically, schools will cover like about 2/3 in year 10, and then they'll spend the first part of year 11 still covering content, and then they'll then switch over to revision and exam prep. Again, it varies from school to school, so you can check with them what their kind of schedule of learning is. I've often found, though, that some schools end up teaching till quite late in the year 11 year, which is where they fall short of then having that revision time. So it is important that your child does a bit of regular revision of vocab. Even if they're learning a different topic, they can go back over and revisit other topics to help that they can recall it and work on that retention of vocab as well. But if you have any questions, do let me know. I know this is going to be quite a lot of information to take in. Obviously, you can go back over the recording at any point. I'll share my slides with you and any of the resources. So if you find that useful, do let me know. Speaking exam is the one that most students and parents are concerned with. So I thought I would talk about that one first, as it is the first exam they do. Essentially now, there's 3 different tasks that they will do. They'll do a role play scenario. So the teacher, the examiner, will act as it's normally like a transactional exchange. So something like ordering in a restaurant or having a discussion with a friend, booking something. And so the teacher will play the role of someone, and then the student will be given some tasks that they have to say on the role play. The idea of the role play is it's really short and sweet. It's a skill that students need to work on because they'll tend to want to show off all of the lovely language. But actually, you just need to say, if it tells you to describe your town with one adjective, then you just describe your town with that one adjective. You don't need to elaborate and show off. It's about just being clear, concise to get those marks. There's a read aloud task now, which is a new task for this GCSE. So your child will be given a short text that they'll read aloud, and they'll be marked on their pronunciation. And then it's followed by a short conversation or some follow-up questions based around the topic so if they were reading aloud a topic about friends and family as the theme, as the topic, then there might then be some questions about what did you do last week with your friends, for example. So there'll be a couple of questions about that topic. And then there's a photo card discussion, which is very similar to what the current GCSE students do. There's a few changes, and I'll talk to you about those. You'll notice that with the read aloud, there's now that focus on students being able to pronounce things correctly. In terms of the reading and the listening, there's also a dictation, and I'll share more about that shortly. But the dictation is where your child will hear part of an audio with some sentences read aloud, and your child has to either copy what they hear and they write it out. So like word for word, if it's in Spanish or French, whatever they're saying, they then write it in that French or Spanish. So they need to be able to listen, understand what's being said, and then write it and check their spelling. So there's a real emphasis with this new GCSE on students being able to recognize the sounds and the symbols. So being able to read aloud, look at a text, being able to decipher the pronunciation of certain letters and groups of letters, and being able to read it properly and accurately. And then also they then get tested in another paper on being able to listen and understand and then being able to spell it. So that link between sound, spelling and saying it aloud, there's a big emphasis on this with the new GCSE. So something that your child can practice is the alphabet and the phonic sounds of the letters, and practice reading aloud things. There's some websites, and I can share them in our webinar course area as well. There's a few websites where students can copy texts into the website, and then they can choose a French accent or a Spanish accent, and it will read aloud the text to them so they can listen and check how it's pronounced, and then they can have a go at repeating it as well. So that's a really good way of practicing for this speaking part of the exam. Or again, with you, perhaps reading aloud some texts and getting them really confident in speaking in front of people. So in terms of how the exams work, they will get some time in advance. So depending on whether they're Edexcel or AQA, they essentially get 15 minutes prep time. In that prep time, they will go into a room with an invigilator and they will get given their role play task, their read aloud, and their photo card. So they will get to see their texts in this prep time, and they'll have a piece of paper that they can make some notes on. So, for example, they can plan their answers to their role play, and they can plan some of their answers to the photo card in that time. They can't use any resources, but they have thinking time before they go into the exam. If they are with an Excel board, they do get, once they go into the exam room with their teacher, they do actually get a minute to practice the read aloud as like a one-time just practice before they go in to do the exam themselves. It's not in AQA. So again, that's just something to be mindful of. But you'll see that from the timings, they're very short and sweet. Like the role play is about a minute to a minute and a half for that task. It's super, super quick. Their read aloud is a little bit longer because they get some questions afterwards. So with AQA, they're going to get 4 surprise questions on the topic of the text afterwards. And with Edexcel, they get 2 if they're working on the foundation. And then you'll see the photo card as well is about 4 to 5 minutes. So essentially, if your child's doing a foundation, within sort of 20 minutes, they'll have done completely. It's a really quick exam and they have more time doing their prep work than they do in the live exam itself. But working on timings for planning their answers is really important. And again, if you've got any questions on this, do let me know, but you can see how it's broken down, whether they're doing the read aloud, the role play and the photo card. Just to give you an idea of what they look like, this is what the read aloud task. So I've got an example in French and in Spanish here. But you can see here that they will get instructions that say, when your teacher asks you, read aloud the following text in French or Spanish. And then, like here, for example, this text is linked to the topic of celebrity culture. So once they've done their read aloud task, they will then get asked some questions on the topic of celebrity culture. And here it's saying in order to get their highest marks, they need to try and develop their answers. So this is where they want to develop, not the role play, but they want to start developing their answers in their read aloud. You can see with Edexcel, this is an example of a higher one. And they would just read that text aloud. And then they will get some questions on the topic of lifestyle and well-being there as well. In terms of the role play, this is what it looks like now. A really great change. Current year 11 students have to do a role play task, but all of the bullet points or all of the numbered tasks are all in the target language. So they're all in French or Spanish. So often, one of the skills I have to work on with my year 11s is they need to decipher what the bullet point is asking them to do before they can even come up with their answer. Now, they've taken that away for the new GCSE. So all the instructions are in English. So students should be able to understand fully what the task is asking them to do. So with the role play, there will always be a setting. So you can see here, this one is saying like you're talking to your Moroccan friend. So me as the examiner will be that Moroccan friend. And it will say, whether you're addressing them informally or formally, it gives you a bit of context. You can see that this one with EdXL, they're saying that they're in a hotel and wanting to book a room, and the teacher, the examiner, me in this case, is going to act the part of the receptionist. But it just says you're expected to say a few words or short phrases. So you can't say one word answers. They're wanting you to give some information. But can you see, like, for example, here with this higher tier AQA, this one, it says, say if you eat healthy and why not? Give one opinion and one reason. So if they, an answer in English equivalent could be saying, like, I normally eat healthy because I love to eat fruit and it's good for your health. And that would be it. That's all they need to say. They don't need to say and describe a recent sporting activity, give two details. Okay, yesterday I played football with my friends. Played football is one thing, with my friends is another. That's two details. That's all they need to say. So with the role play, it's about practicing and keeping it really short and sweet. In terms of the question, they do need to practice asking questions themselves. So here, there is questions where they need to ask. So again, that's another skill to practice. Can your child ask questions? Do they know how to say how much, where, how many? So thinking about those question words is a really good thing to practice. And then we've got the picture-based task. So the picture-based task is, again, depending on your exam board, AQA, they get given 2 photos, and EdXL, they get given 2 photos, but you'll notice in the instructions, they just need to describe 1. So again, a good activity that you can do is either looking through your own family photos, getting your child to practice describing the photo is a really good one. There's going to be photos on each of the themes. So do you have a photo that links to, like, your town or your region? Is there some family photos or photos with friends? Do you have some photos of a holiday or a trip or going shopping? All of these photos could then be used to practice this part of the speaking exam. And the way that I teach my students is a technique using the palm of your hand. So if you think of the palm of your hand and people, how many people can you see in the photo? What do the people look like? Are they students? Are they family members? Are they teachers? Are they work? Is there like a profession you can mention? Then we say A, action. What are they doing? L, the location. Where are they? Are they at the beach? Are they in school? Are they in a park? M is for mood. Do they look happy? Do they look sad? And then you can then do S or E for something else or extra detail. So like describing the weather or giving your opinion. So there's lots of different techniques that you can use for photo cards, but they have to spend about a minute talking about a photo. So with AQA, they do have to say at least one thing about each photo. It might be that actually with this one, they're more confident talking about photo 2 because they have more vocab. So maybe they'll only mention 1 or 2 things about photo 1 and they'll spend the rest of the minute describing photo 2. That's absolutely fine. And with EdXL, they just choose one picture to describe. This photo is basically a springboard for the final part of the exam, which is a conversation. The conversation will be based around the theme of the photos. So, for example, this one, the theme is people and lifestyle. So it says here that there'll be a conversation which would link to people and lifestyle. So it could be about healthy lifestyles, education and work, identity, like family relationships, anything that fits within that theme, the teacher could then ask. For this one, for example, it says that you're going to then move on to a broader conversation about lifestyle and well-being. So any topics that link into lifestyle and well-being, they might get asked there as well. So the photo, once they've described it, links into that wider conversation aspect. And this is the one that's the highest marked in terms of the 3 tasks. So it goes in kind of order of difficulty. Any questions on speaking? Feel free to let me know. Hopefully, that's helped. So you know exactly what the speaking exam looks like. It's quite detailed, isn't it? The 3 tasks that they have to do. In terms of the listening, uh, they have a listening paper. And again, like I mentioned, questions are only from that vocab and grammar list. So as long as they've got that and they've learnt it, then they should be able to access all of the questions. And they've also changed it so that before the year 11s, they will have to do some questions in the target language. So there'll be questions in French or Spanish that they then have to answer in French or Spanish. They've taken those out for the new GCSE. So section A is where it's just based on listening comprehension. All questions are either multiple choice or answered in English sentences. And I'll show you some examples of what they look like. In section B, this is what I was talking to you about, the being able to recognize the sound to the spelling. Now, French students will have a little bit more difficulty than Spanish because Spanish is very phonetic. Once you know how the alphabet sounds and once you know your key word sounds, it's quite easy to be able to read it and be accurate. With French, you've got to be mindful that there's lots of silent letters and bits of the words and rules. So again, it's a slight difference between the two, but to be mindful of it. So in terms of how the timings, much shorter. We've got 35 minutes for foundation or 45 minutes for higher if it's AQA. Edexcel is slightly longer, 45 minutes and an hour. The reason why it's longer is that in the AQA, they are keeping, like the current year 11s, that all audio is played twice. So students will listen to an audio, they'll be able to make some answers or make some notes, they'll re-listen to it, and then they can make their final answers before moving on to the next questions. However, Edexcel have decided that this time with the new GCSE, they're going to play the audio 3 times. So there's more time for students to listen and process. It does make the exam much longer though. Within that listening exam, there's 5 minutes reading time. Now, I always tell my students that 5 minutes is crucial in terms of looking through the paper, looking through the types of questions. There's certain questions where we can maybe narrow down the answers that we're listening for. We can underline keywords. So again, there's a real good skill in using that 5 minutes time. And at the end, they are now giving 2 minutes to check the dictation, because if they've listened to something and written it out, they can then go back and look at the sentence and use all of their knowledge of their vocab, spelling and their grammar to make sure that it's accurate what they've written. So they're giving some extra time for checking at the end. So just to give you an example of what listening questions might look like on a past paper. So this is typical of AQA, of having positive, negatives and positive and negatives. So again, knowing their opinion words. You can see here that this is what one would look like where they've got to answer. So here it says like, in winter, the best weather is. So already we know that we need to be listening out for weather phrases, and then they can write their answer in English. It's really interesting, but when I've marked exam papers, the amount of answers that get written in listening papers, that when you actually read back the question and read it aloud, it makes absolutely no sense. So I always say to students, reread your answer in English. Just make sure that it makes logical sense, because you're surprised in exam mode, you don't think. Again, here's another sort of multiple choice. This is very typical of what an Edexcel paper would look like. Edexcel also love these gap fills where they give you in listening and reading papers a selection of words. You listen to people talking and then you complete the sentences. So a tip I would always say is, in that 5 minutes, go to these type of questions. You can already, rather than trying to look at this whole box and every time you're listening to a sentence trying to work out which word it is, already I could narrow it down in my 5 minutes. Marta's father is A. Okay, Marta's father is a teacher. That works. So I could pencil in teacher. doctor, that also works, police officer, and writer. So actually, all of these work. But is A helping people? Is A reading? None of these make sense. So we can already dismiss all of them. So when we're listening for A, we're just focusing on, can we listen out to the French or Spanish of these words? And these are the sort of techniques and tricks that we can work on with exam skills. And then this is what the transcript looks like for the dictation. So for AQA, they listen to either 4 or 5 short sentences, depending on whether they are higher or foundation. And again, for this one, you do listen to the sentence 3 times. And they say that the first time as a full sentence, so you listen to the whole extract, so you get the whole context. Then the second and third time, so the second time they break it down into shorter parts, and then the third time it's as a full sentence again. So this means that students can listen and then they can write what they hear. They can check that second time and that third time as well. Now, for Edexcel, it's not at sentence level, all of the questions. Some of the questions, they just have to fill in a couple of missing words. And then for the last few points, they have to do full sentences. So again, a slight variation depending on exam board, but it's all the same exam skill of listening and spelling out the words. The reading paper is very similar to the listening. They have a section A where all of the questions are multiple choice or answering in English. And then instead of the dictation for the reading, they have a translation part. And it's just translating into English. Again, for the reading, it's going to mainly be from that vocab list. Now, they have allowed up to 2% of words in the text to not be from the vocab list, but they will add like an asterisk and they'll give a little glossary at the end for any unfamiliar words. There might be a few single odd words that they don't give a glossary for, but this is where students will be able to use the context of the rest of the text to work out what it is. And often it'll be family words as well. So they might have words that relate to it that they already know. So that's a really nice change for the new GCSE. In terms of timings, it's 45 minutes or an hour, whether it's foundation or higher. And it's exactly the same for each exam board. This is the one where it's very similar to the current exams. The only difference between exam boards is AQA. For translations, it's 5 sentences, whereas with Edexcel, for the higher tier, they ask for a paragraph to be translated instead of sentence level. But it's very similar in terms of AQA and Edexcel. And in terms of a reading, there'll be lots of different texts, newspaper articles, blogs, text messages, little adverts, letters or emails, and students will read the text and then answer the questions based on their understanding. Lots of it is multiple choice, or they've got to choose like letters or names of people, or it might be that they're asked to recognize the past, present, future, for example, or they'll have some sentences that they need to answer in English. But there's no French or Spanish questions in these exams now, which I think is quite a nice touch for the students. And then that leads us to the final paper. Now, paper 4 is always the last exam of the series. And again, I've broken it down into foundation and higher for you. It's very similar. There's a few extra parts to the new GCSE, but you'll notice that photo skill, where I was talking to you about that palm and describing who you can see, what they're doing, location. Although photo card is a speaking skill, it actually is a writing skill in the foundation paper as well. So whether you're doing AQA or Edexcel, they'll have a photo and they'll have to write some short sentences about the photo. It's 5 sentences at AQA and 4 in Edexcel, but it's very similar. They then have a writing task, 50 words at AQA, 40 to 50 words in Edexcel. AQA give 5 bullet points of what they want covered. There's less bullet points in the Edexcel, but they do give you a present tense, an opinion, and a future tense bullet point. So they're asking for students to use the future tense in this one. Slight difference with AQA, they've added in a little grammar task, but it is multiple choice, 5 questions. Students will have some sentences and they'll have a word missing and they'll have 3 options. Now, looking at the sample materials that the exam boards have provided, these are things like adjective agreement. So they need to check, like, is it masculine, feminine, singular, plural? They choose the appropriate one to fit the sentence. It might be that there's a verb missing and they need to decide if it's a past tense, present tense, or future tense verb that's missing. So they are very short grammar and they're all multiple choice as well. So if your child's not 100% on these grammars, it's 5 marks. So it's not huge in the grand scheme of things. And it's always a multiple choice. So they've got a 1 in 3 chance of having an educated guess as well if there's something they're not sure of. Then there's a translation task. In AQA, it's 5 sentences and it's the 4th one. And it's also the 4th task in Edexcel. 5 simple short sentences to translate into the target language. And then we have the writing task. And this is the big writing task. So it's task 3 of Edexcel or task 5 of AQA. Now, students will get a choice of 2. And it'll be 2 different topics or themes. So students can choose whichever theme they think that they've got more vocab for, that they're more confident writing about. And it's 90 words. Now, this is the crossover question. So this task will also feature in the higher paper. It's like the grade 5 question. It will always feature past, present, and future tenses because that is the success criteria for GCSE, that they can talk about those 3 different time frames. So for AQA, they give you the 3 bullet points. So they'll say something like, if it was hobbies and free time, there'll be a question that will say what you did last week, what sports you did last week with your friends. Then it will say, what do you normally do to keep yourself fit in terms of sports? And then it will say, what would you like to do in the future? What sports would you like to try in the future, essentially? And they've got to write 90 words. With Edexcel, there's 1 extra bullet point as it tries to elicit you to give an opinion. So what's your favorite sports and why? What sports don't you like and why? And then the higher tier paper, task 2, you can see here, is for AQA, is that same writing. So it's exactly the same. The 2 choices that they get for foundation, the highers will get exactly the same question. The same with Edexcel for task 3, it's the first of higher. And then the biggest task is the 150 words. And Edexcel asks for around 130 to 150. AQA only give you 2 bullet points. So some argue that it's good because it gives students the creativity to explore those points more. However, others argue that it's like, how do they then build up from those 2 bullet points into that 150? So that's where skills like breaking down a bullet point and creating 2 more bullet points, so you've got some more prompts, is something that can be worked on. Edexcel are just giving the 4 bullet points. And again, they want past, present, future, but instead of an opinion, they want a pro and a con of something. So if it was like about your town and it was like, what did you do last week in your town? What can tourists do in your town? What's pros and cons of living in your town? And then where would you like to live in the future, for example? And I just saw your question. I was just saying, yeah, so Jolene, actually, I'm sorry, it's got different names coming up, about the 90-word task. No, so it doesn't have to be exact. They give this as a guidance for 90 words. In terms of an examiner, I wouldn't sit if I was marking or writing, I wouldn't sit and be counting words because that's just a waste of the examiner's time. However, it might get counted if it looked really short. In terms of making sure that students can access those top bands for the marks to get the most marks, 90 words is like what the examiners would expect you to write to be able to include all of the right language and cover the content in enough detail with development. So it's an approximation. I wouldn't suggest for students to be sitting there counting their words in their exam, they can always do a little guide of roughly, but again, it's about that timing. It's a lot of time to keep counting exactly how many words, but it just gives them an idea. And initially, when they're practicing their writing, if you think about it in terms of timings, something that students have to practice. So if we were doing maybe the hour and 15 minutes for the higher, we've got 3 tasks. But if we look at how many marks, this one's 25, this one's 15, this one's 10. We're probably going to want to use these marks as an indication of how long we want to spend, like 10 minutes maximum on a translation, 15 minutes to write your 19 words, 25 minutes. That would take us up to 50. We'd still have 25 minutes. Then you could then add some more time into task 3 because we've got a bit more time to add the more complex structures. And we'd want to spend at least 5 minutes proofreading at the end as well. So yeah, it doesn't have to be exact, but it's an approximate. The same with like the Edexcel, they give a guide of 40 to 50, 130 to 150. If it's in that window, if they wrote for that 90, if they wrote 100 words, they're not penalised. And with language exams, and I know this might differ to things like English, they don't. If I was marking a piece of writing, I wouldn't get to 90 words and then just stop and be like, oh, I can't mark anything else because we've hit the 90 words. With the language degrees, we do look at the whole thing. There are students that write essays and we do mark everything. The only thing that we need to be mindful of is the more that's written means that there's more risk of error. And then when we have errors, that then impedes the communication and the clarity, which then loses the mark. So it's better to be concise than really detailed and elaborate if we're not sure on how to say things. And again, with accents, it varies. So sometimes accents change meanings of words. In those instances, we do need to have the accents. Giving an example with French and Spanish. So for example, sometimes with past tenses, we have accents on the ends of our letters, and that highlights one, that the sound goes up when we say it, but also if we don't have the accent, then it's not conjugated properly into the past tense. So for example, if I said like Spanish, visité, I visited, if I didn't have the E accent on the end, it's not past tense. So there's some words that do need to have accents, and there's sometimes accents change the meanings of words. So sometimes we need them. Certain words that don't have accents, it doesn't change the meaning too much. So I hope that's answered the question. But things like verbs is really important that the accents are in the right place. And yeah, I'm loving all of the questions coming through as well. Yeah, there's different parts of the assessment, and I can actually, once we've gone through this, I can actually bring up a mark scheme for the writing so I can show you. But you get marked. So, for example, the 22 marks, out of those 22 marks, there's going to be some of it that's talking about that, the use of grammar and the use of vocabulary. And then there's going to be another mark that's talking about how they answered the prompts, essentially. So that's where the marking will play into it. So in terms of grammar is really important. So for example, if they're asking for a present tense bullet point, to answer that question, we need to make sure we're using the present tense. If it's saying, what do you normally do? And you say, I went, then you haven't answered the question. So grammar is really important that we get it correct. And also a range of vocab, like variety of vocab is good, because if we're using the same adjectives all of the time, one, it gets repetitive and it gets boring, but it doesn't show the examiner that you've got that good appropriate range of vocab. It's limited and restricted. But it's a really interesting question about whether it's more important grammar or appropriate words. I'd say that you need the appropriate words to make sure that you're answering the task. If you answered a task and were writing things that weren't relevant to the bullet points, none of that gets awarded marks because it's not marked for the content, but it would get looked at in terms of grammar. So if you had all your tenses accurately, it would show a good application of grammar. But keep these questions coming because they make me think as well, which is amazing. As I say, it's a new GCSE, so I'm still fine-tuning all of the details. I'm going to share with you some websites that you can use to support like revision and look at sort of practice questions. The exam boards at the moment have some sample materials, so you can actually go onto AQA or edXL and you can look at some sample materials. So it will give you a sample of what a full writing paper looks like, what a full listening and reading paper looks like. So you can download these and have a look at them. And so thinking about how you, as a parent, can support your child, even if you don't speak the language, because that's often a question I get asked. There's lots of ways you can support vocab learning. Your child will find the way that they revise best. Some students love apps. I've got apps on the phone like Quizlet and Blooket and Quizlet and Memrise, and they might be like vocab learning using different apps and games. Some students like pen and paper. They like rote learning, copy it, look at it, cover it, write it, then check have they spelled it correctly and doing that kind of repetition of learning. Some students like to learn by learning banks of phrases as well. Creating flashcards is a great one where students could have the French or Spanish on one side, the English on the other, either at sentence level or the topic vocab. And then they can practice like doing games like making memory games or card games. You could even have like, English on one side, English and then French or Spanish and play things like Snap. You could use the flashcards then to check in and work together, test them and make games. If your child's creative, I've had some students that learned better when they created a poster. So if it was a topic of friends and families, they created a detailed poster and they used the internet and had lots of pictures and made it all elaborate. And some of them like to paint and they painted like mind maps and for their walls. Post-it notes. When I was a student at university, when I was preparing for my French speaking exams, and I had a lot of specific terminology because I was doing lots of different topics. I had to do quite a lot of medical terminology I needed to know. It was really tricky to remember. I had Post-it notes everywhere. And if your child struggles with verb conjugations, for example, get them to write the verbs that they need to know on a Post-it note and have that Post-it note on the mirror in the bathroom or on the fridge. And then every time they're brushing their teeth, they've got to read and practice that verb tense. Or every time they go to the fridge to get a drink, they've got to practice that verb tense. So you can make it a household event as well. Watching TVs and films in the language as a family is a really good thing for building up listening skills. Often when we get nearer to exams or after mocks, speaking and listening are the two skills that often students need more support with. So building up listening skills doesn't have to be always exam focused. Watching TV and films, if you've watched a favorite film together or there's a favorite TV series that you've binged, you could then rewatch it. Streaming services like Netflix and Prime, Apple TV, they all have features, Disney Plus, they all have features where you can change the language. So you could just change the English TV program or the English film, change it into French or Spanish. You can always put the English subtitles back on, but then it helps your child attune their ears to the different sounds, the accents, the speed of speaking. They'll naturally start picking up words that they recognize the more that they watch and the more that they listen. And it's a fun, engaging way of revising and building up that listening skill. Another strategy is get them to teach you something they've learned. Maybe they've been learning a new topic at school. Get them to teach you 5 phrases on that new topic. If they can teach it to you, then they know it. So these are just some of the different ways that you could perhaps work with your child to help them with their vocab learning and make it a fun thing to do together. And there's lots of useful websites. Now, I have shared the links in the webinar area online when you log in, where you can access the replay. You can access all of the links for things that I talk about today. but I will share it in the chat with you as well, is this lyrics training. Now they can go onto it's a free app. You can use it on the phone as well. They don't need to sign up. If they want to register for free, they can, and then it tracks their progress, but they can just skip the sign up, and access it for free. They at the top here where it says learning French, they can then choose learning Spanish or whatever language it is. They can search by genre. So if your child loves listening to rap music, pop music, soundtracks for music, whatever type of music, there is something there. Or you've got things like the top lyrics that are played, like this one's a French one, and Papa Ute is a very popular French song. If they play it, you can either do it as a karaoke. If you all like a bit of a sing-along as a family, you could have a French or Spanish sing-along night. But if not, they can play it as a game. They have a write mode or a choice mode. I would definitely choose choice mode. What happens is a YouTube video of the music video is played and the lyrics will appear on the screen. Now, the website will take off like 10% of the words for the beginners level. 10% of the words will get removed, and then it will highlight that there's a missing word, and you need to really listen carefully. If it was the right mode, you have to type and spell it, which is quite tricky initially. So I'd definitely choose choice mode. Choice mode gives you 4 options to choose from. You can re-listen to the part of the song multiple times to see if you can pick out that word. And then you can have a guess. If you guess it wrong, then it will just say, no, have another go. And you can keep going until you get it right. And it will record how many hits you get and how many misses you get. So it's something that you can practice over and over again. But it's a really good way, again, of attuning the ear to those sounds and thinking, oh, what was that word that was missing? And then having a look at the screen. Oh, is that what the word is? Is that how it's spelled? That's going to really help with that dictation practice as well. And it's a fun way of doing it. So I'll pop the link in the chat as well so that you've got it. But it's lyricstraining.com. You might have an ad pop up, but you can just avoid all of them, click move on, and you don't need to sign up. If you want to go directly to the French one, because the lyrics training one will take you to the main one. But if you click on lyricstraining.com, you can then put /FR for French or SP for Spanish. But I found that students really like that website. If they like listening to music, and again, things like Spotify have great Spanish and French playlists. Another one, does your child use BBC Bitesize for any other subjects? I know that often when I speak to students, they're like, oh yeah, I use it for science, but I don't use it for Spanish. I'm going to just share with you how you can access BBC Bitesize, and it has some fantastic resources. Now, because it's the new GCSE, it's obviously a work in progress. Like if you've tried to get revision guides, you might find that not all of the revision guides for the new GCSE are available yet because they haven't actually created them. Yeah, we have to be patient. But essentially, GCSE, you'll notice that it has it for loads of subjects. Now, I'm just going to show you. Let's go for Spanish. It's the same for French. Now, you just need to be mindful that it's got the ones for this year's exams. Obviously, for the new GCSE, we want to choose the one for 2026. Now, you can see here already, we've got quite a few topics that we can look at already. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's normally a bit of grammar as well. So if they want a bit of grammar practice, how verbs work, practicing their present tense, future tense. So it's really good, but it works by topics. The way they've designed this is linked to the new GCSE, the persons that it's all teachers, examiners that are hired to create these resources. So here, for example, you will have vocab. So again, they've got great vocab lists. They've got some grammar, and they've even got mini quizzes. If you're seeking listening practice, certain topics might have listening or they might have reading practice. It gives you all of the answers as well. So for example, here, there's listening practice, But then you also can show the answer after you've listened to it, and it will tell you what they've said and why. So it's all self-marking, and it's great because it's great for building that vocab. You'll notice that we've got some higher tier stuff coming here as well. Now, this topic only has listening and reading, but if you go to different topics, some of them might have speaking questions, writing questions with model writing answers. The grammar will have videos and quizzes so that they can test themselves on it. And I know that a lot of students use it for other subjects and they don't realize that they can use it for Spanish. So it's a really good website that they can use. So I would highly recommend that they use that as well. Another website is Seneca Learning. And again, a lot of schools subscribe to it, but it is free and anyone can enroll. I find that with my students, it's a love or hate. I'll pop the link in the chat as well as the BBC Bitesize ones. And again, these are all saved in our area. But I'll just share with you. There's a couple of extra websites. Yeah, so Seneca Learning, this is interactive. Again, it goes by topic. There's translation, there's listening practice. Lots of schools use it for homework as it's self-marking and self-assessing. But you can, if your school doesn't use it, then it's something that you can just sign up to as well. So I'll share these links with you. In terms of vocab lists, if your child likes using their phone for revising, then often things like Memrise and Quizlet are good. Um, you can have free accounts. There are also paid for subscriptions. For my students, I'm working on building the Quizlet sets. And so for my group students, once I've created them, I'll share them with them. And as long as they've registered for free onto Quizlet, they can then access all of the interactive activities without having to pay for any subscriptions, which is quite useful. But again, if your child likes websites, and the exam boards don't get used very often, but these are great resources. So they actually, if you go onto the AQA or the Spanish website, just make sure that you choose the right year of the exam. You can download full specifications, so full vocab lists for each of the topics. You can also download, there's lots of teaching materials. So you can download like vocab quizzes and other sort of learning materials as well. And you can also look at either past papers. Obviously, for the new exam, we don't have past papers, but we have sample materials. So you could download a full reading paper and the mark scheme. And then if they wanted to practice a paper, then they could use that and use the mark scheme to check their knowledge and see have they got the answers right or not. So the exam boards are really good, but the vocab and grammar list is really prescriptive. So I would say if you can, have a little chat with your child and find out, are there things that they're finding more difficult, thinking about how they would like you to help them, thinking about what they're confident in, and then building up from that. Now, for my students and for you guys that have attended live, I've created some resources. So one of the things is a poster for both French and Spanish, which is about varying opinions. So rather than students just saying, I like to play football, for example, they can say things like, I find it fascinating to play football, or it pleases me to play football, or it's always been my dream to play football. So lots of different ways that they can vary their language. And also common adjectives. As an examiner, the most common adjectives we hear are interesting, boring, and fun. Everything is boring, everything is interesting, everything is fun. And it's absolutely fine to use them in spoken and written responses. Once you've used them once, there are so many lovely adjectives that could be used instead of them. So I've compiled a list of ones that they could just use and exchange. So instead of saying boring, they could say it's tiresome or tedious. Instead of interesting, it's actually, it's entertaining or s astonishing. So there's lots of different adjectives. Again, I'll pop these in our learning area, but if you'd like to download a copy just to download to whichever device you're working on now, I'll just pop them into the chat for you, and hopefully your student will find them useful. They might want to either have them downloaded onto a device or even printed and put up on a wall or in a folder to help them remember. And every time they're giving their opinion on something, they can just choose one of the alternatives. So I'll pop those in the chat, but they are going to be saved online on the website so you can access them. And yeah, I hope you find those useful. And I'll be building some topic vocab lists over the next few weeks. I'd love to know what has been your biggest takeaway from today's session. It's a lot of information, isn't it, about the different exams, but hopefully it's given you a bit of clarity about what your child's actually expected to do for their French or Spanish exams. And then finally, just to really share with you how you can work with me. Now, I know some of you already do, which is amazing, but I run online group classes, and these are focused on guided revision. At the moment, for example, with my year 9 and 10 Spanish, we're focused on going over some key stage 3 vocabulary that we need in order to build that good foundations. And we're working on revising some key grammar as well before we then move on to more specific topic and those exam skills. The year 11s are straight into exam focused sessions. I'll then offer one-to-one booster sessions in terms of speaking. For those that do exams, like for example, when mocks are coming up, and so for example, with my year 11s in November, lots of them have speaking mocks. So I'll be running some mini speaking mocks with me so they can get that full exam experience beforehand as well. So I'll be able to share when these are up and running. But this is the timetable at the moment for the group classes. Now, my GCSE French year 9 and 10 don't start until October, but all of the Spanish are up and running, and my year 11s are all running at the moment. And you can book the tasters there for £25. But again, if you've got any questions or want to reach out about joining any of these sessions, then let me know. But it's great to hear that the talk's been really useful for you in terms of like the timings. If you'd like a copy of the slides as well, I'm more than happy to share these and I can upload them to the website as well. But I'm glad that you found it useful. If you'd like to know some of the feedback from some of my clients as well, I had a year 11 student that actually joined me quite late, just before the exams. But yeah, she was a really dedicated student actually, and quite shortly went from a grade 4 to a 7 when in her mocks, which was absolutely amazing. I had another student who was a home educated student who texted me to say that she'd got the 5, which was the highest she could get for foundation. And we worked really hard on just building up exam skills because she had that vocab knowledge. And one of my lovely successes from last year was a boy who had completely lost motivation in Spanish. He'd actually dropped his grades. I think he was like working at a grade 5, but he was trying to sit the higher paper. And when we within 6 weeks, he'd already increased a grade. And the most amazing thing is he was hoping to get a 7. He actually got a grade 8 in his final exams, which, yeah, was just amazing. So I just thought I would share some of the successes of my students. I won't read them all out to you, but lots of the feedback from my students and my clients is available on my website or on my social medias as well. If you want to get in touch or have any questions, then here are all my contact details. You can reach me by email, by WhatsApp, on any of the social media platforms. If you have any questions about revision, or even as the exams that start to approach or mocks start to approach and you have some questions, I am open for asking questions or providing you some support. And I'm glad that you've all found it so useful. For the last few minutes, I'll just open up with Q&A. So if you have any other questions, then do let me know. Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad that you found it useful. I know it's a lot. You probably on a Sunday evening, that's a lot to take in, isn't it? Oh, but amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday and do reach out if you've got any questions. I'm glad that's been of use to you. I'm looking forward to our next class on Thursday as well. Amazing. Yeah, in terms of vocab, how much time do you recommend spending on vocab? Ideally, if you could, I always say to my students, little and often is key. It's that as you can see, there's a lot of topics and there's a lot of topic vocabulary. The good thing is lots of topic vocabulary can be exchanged, and especially when I have students that are needing to get to a pass, for example, and it's quite short in close time, then we work on strategies like there's lots of vocab for writing and speaking that you can recycle. So, for example, adjective to describe your town, for example, we're saying things like my town is modern or that building is old, it's noisy, it's expensive, it's dirty, it's clean. All of those sort of adjectives, they can be recycled when I talk about my holiday and the accommodation, for example. So you can see how certain topics and vocab can be recycled and you can use it just because you learn it in that one topic doesn't mean that it stays in that one topic. If they can revise daily, that's really good. 5 minutes a day, 5-10 minutes a day, because especially if your student's learning a topic, often what will happen at school is they'll learn different topics through year 10 and then new topics again in year 11. And actually, like when you're doing even your mock exams, if they've studied 3 or 4 topics, they're learning in sequence. They might not be revisiting that topic in their lessons because they're constantly learning new. So if they keep learning new, they're going to forget all of that stuff they've already learned. So by revisiting that vocab daily or little and often, it's going to help. It's essentially moving that vocab from the short term to the long term memory. And we need to see something 4 or 5 times at least for us to be able to recall it better and remember it better. So to build up that bank of vocab, yeah, and it doesn't have to be huge chunks of time, just 5-10 minutes over while your child's having cereal, for example, maybe they could do a bit of vocab practice using an app or using some flashcards or something like that. And you'll be surprised that doing that each day, how much quicker the vocab builds and how much more your child's able to remember and retain as well. Because obviously, the more new learning that keeps coming in, some of the old stuff is going to filter out. So by revisiting it regularly, it's going to help bring it back to the front. Okay, yeah, I know that. So I hope that's answered the question, but it doesn't have to be huge amounts. But, oh, that's lovely feedback as well. Thank you. And it always, as much as I say, it's important to have the topic vocab, like that the vocab list. And that's the great thing about this new GCSE is we've got the prescriptive vocab list. So like in my groups, I'll be able to share the student-friendly versions once I've edited and adapted them. But just listening to music, watching some films together, making it fun and engaging as well, because GCSE studies can be stressful. So adding a bit of a fun element to it as well. If your child's creative, they might want to create an interesting board game for everyone to play and teach a bit of the language. Or it might just be, yeah, just listening to and working on songs. Amazing. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for attending today. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday evening. And do reach out if you've got any more questions.